All Suzuki Violin Book 2 pieces explained. If we haven't met, hi, I'm Megan. I'm a violinist and Suzuki trained teacher. I've been playing the violin for practically my whole life and been teaching adult beginners for over 12 years now. If you're enjoying my videos, please make sure you are subscribed to my channel and don't forget to check out my free community that's always linked in the description. Suzuki Book 2 is such a milestone in your violin journey, mostly because the arguably two biggest techniques, shifting and vibrato, are taught in this book. A lot of times in the Suzuki repertoire, the last piece in a book is pretty difficult, and then the first piece in the next book is not so much. And that's definitely the case here in the transition from book 1 to book 2. The Gazikavat, the last piece in book 1, is actually like a pretty hard piece for book 1 level. And to be honest with you, sometimes I just skip it depending on the student. But before even diving into the first piece of book 2, we need to talk about the tonalization. I have my students learn the G major tonalization, and there's really two big points to this. So the first is to talk about resonant or ringing intonation. Something that students are probably wondering is how they can tell if they're in tune if they do not have finger tapes. And listening to the natural ring or resonance of your instrument is one major way that we can do that. I like to describe this ring or resonance as that the note just keeps going even after you're done bowing. Hey, that rhymes. The most resonant note on your instrument is likely going to be the third finger on the D string, so I like to use that as an example. Do you hear how the note keeps going even after my bow stops moving? That's the ring and resonance that you want to be looking for. So in the tonalization, it alternates between resonant and not resonant notes. Actually, every single note in that tonalization should ring except the B's. So practicing this is a good way to get the student's ear tuned into that and eventually help them be able to take off the tapes in the future, ideally probably by the end of the book, if not then somewhere in book 3. Another point of the tonalization is to, of course, work on tone to make sure you are producing a pleasant, full, ringing tone and that it is improving throughout the book. So by the time you get to the end of book 2, your tone doesn't sound like it did in book 1. So the first piece in book 2 is Chorus from Judas Maccabeus. Are fairly straightforward and it is a little bit repetitive, which helps as well. Really the point of this piece is to work on long full bows, listen for that ring, that resonance in the majority of the notes. The hardest thing in this piece is going to be using the high third finger in measure 13, and yes, I have that memorized what measure it is. The biggest tip there is to have both your fourth and third fingers set down on the string before you even start playing that measure. Chorus from Judas Maccabeus is also a really good piece to work on vibrato with later down the line. The second piece in book 2 is Musette. About Musette is the key. It's in the key of D major. Now, of course, this is not new. We had D major back in book 1, but we've been playing in G major for a long time, and we're going to go back to G major after that. So making sure that we're playing C sharps in this piece is important. The biggest thing with Musette is the bowing. There's a lot of slurs, and then there's also like alternating between slurred and non-slurred notes. So getting that bowing right is important. I also like to work on dynamics in this piece as well. The third piece in book 2 is Hunter's Chorus. If you skip the Gazikavat back in book 1, and this is the first piece where you encounter 16th notes. And the big thing with this piece is it is the first time we lift the bow off of the string. In measure 25 and 26, after you play the open A, the bow should come off the string. approaching in book 2, and obviously this is ultimately preparing you for more off the string bow strokes, so that lift is important. We also want to emphasize alternating bowing here. This is not the first time we've had alternating bowing. We actually did it all the way back in long ago in book 1, but just as a refresher, whenever you have the rhythmic pattern of 1 quarter note followed by 2 eighth notes, you use your whole bow on the quarter note and alternate the eighth notes between the frog and the tip. The 4-note slurs also have some tricky string crossings, so practicing them with stops in between the notes can be helpful for cleaning those up. This piece also has a first and a second ending for the very first time, so of course walking through students through that, there we go, is important too. Piece 4 is long ago. So this is similar to the long ago in book 1, but it is expanded upon. So it is 2 parts, the theme and the variation. The theme is the same one as in book 1, it's just in a different key. Book 1 was in A major, book 2 is in G major. But same ideas apply with the alternating bowing, and we want to make sure to emphasize the dynamics on the 3rd line. The variation is up bow staccato, baby, yes! So we want to make sure that we're playing this in the middle of the bow and that we're keeping our fingers down as much as possible so that we don't hear any extraneous notes or strings. Piece number 5 is waltz. The biggest thing with this piece is the bow division and I guess bow speed. So on the dotted quarter notes, you want to use a slow bow, and on the eighth notes, you want to use a fast bow. The idea is that you want to use the same amount of bow on both the down bow and the up bow, so that you can stay around the same part of the bow, which would be lower half. If you don't do that, here's what happens. I'm out of bow. So slow bows on the dotted quarters, fast bows on the eighth notes. Piece 6 is beret. The big thing in this piece is dynamics. You have a lot of really fun dynamic contrast, which is great to work on with the student. There is also a tricky intonation section in the 3rd line involving a D sharp, but then going back to the F sharp on the E string. So you need to make sure your D sharp is high enough, but that your F sharp is not too high. Piece number 7 is the 2 grenadiers. So there's actually quite a lot going on with this piece. It is our first piece in a minor key. It's in the key of D minor, at least the first part is anyway. So it's a great time to practice a 1 octave D minor scale and talk about the different kinds of minor scales as well. The piece also changes keys. It goes from D minor to D major, which is technically the first time we've had this written in a piece. The minuets back in book 1 did modulate briefly, but it was not notated in the key signature. The other big thing with this piece is the rhythm. So first we have our very first instance of a dotted 8th followed by a 16th note. So that is a new rhythmic pattern overall. But then also in the middle section, the rhythm gets tricky because the notes are so repetitive. You're playing the same note 3, 4, 5 times in a row, but with different note values. So if you are not listening to this piece, it is extremely easy to get the rhythm wrong. Piece number 8 is Witch's Dance, which again is all about rhythm. So we want to differentiate between the dotted 8th, 16th and the triplet. We definitely do not want them to sound the same. I like to lean on the edge of like over dotting or double dotting the eighth note just to emphasize that difference. Additionally, the meno mosso section, which meno mosso means slower, by the way, has some tricky finger placements and can be difficult for intonation. Piece number 9 is Gavotte from Meghan. Before going over this piece, I like to work on the B flat major scale because there is a section in this piece that is in B flat major and uses all of the B flat major finger placements. I often tell my students to ignore the dots over the 16th notes. Do not play those staccato, just the 8th notes, because it is a faster piece and it's really difficult to play staccato 16th notes at a faster pace. This is also our first instance of a written out trill. We need to make sure that is even with the 30-second notes. This is our first time to have a GP, a grand pause, which just means a measure of silence. And we have our very first chords, pizzicato chords at the end. Piece number 10 is the Lully Gavotte. So this is where the shifting comes into play. So this is our very first piece in the Suzuki repertoire with an technically optional shift. So in the music, they have notated it as a 4th finger extension to reach the high C in like measure 23, I believe it is. But I personally just choose to shift. 1, I think it's a good time to just introduce shifting. It's an important skill students need to learn. And 2, I just don't like 4th finger extensions, but maybe that's just me. But yeah, so before starting the Lully Gavotte, I already have started shifting exercises with my students, and we are working through shifting books, namely the Whistler Introducing the Positions as well. We are also lifting our bow quite a bit in the first and last part of this piece, and it is in a new key, the key of A minor, so no sharps or flats. Although the first piece that we have a TR trill notated. Next up, we have minuet in G. Such a cute piece. I always it reminds me of just like being on a cafe in Paris, like outside sipping some coffee or something. I think it's just so cute. So yeah, rhythm is important. Obviously we have a bunch of the dotted 8/16 notes in a row, but in the top half I think the even more important thing is bow division. There's a very specific way that you need to use your bow in order to play that part optimally. The second half is, of course, up bow staccato. You can see we're building on it, right? Back in the long ago, we just had 2 per bow, and here we have 4. We also have some chromaticism at the end. And the final piece of book 2 is the Boccherini minuet. So this is probably the most easily recognizable piece in the book. It was featured in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. There's a lot going on here. So first we have syncopated rhythms at the beginning, which means like the main note is not right on the beat. We have trills with turns. And we have an instance for the very first time in the Suzuki repertoire where the violin is not the melody. I also sometimes like to teach harmonics here if the student is ready for it, just as something fun. I was actually taught that way when I was a kid. I remember that and thinking like, why the heck would we do that? But now I get it. So obviously this is a short synopsis of each piece, not an exhaustive list, but if you are working through book 2 and you want more detailed description of each piece plus how to play them, definitely check out my Suzuki Book 2 course, which I'll leave in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and please make sure you subscribe before you go.